start playing something else. I don't think so. All right. Well, I hope everyone thought of some really good questions while we were watching the video. Our speaker finally made it through all the traffic and came. So this is Esther Parish from the Biodiversity and Sustainable Systems Environmental Sciences Division at ORNL. Let's give her a hand.
Thank you. I'm so sorry to be so late. Well,
I have a microphone here, so
okay.
that there you go. So that way everybody can
Can you hear me better?
Yeah.
All right. So hi, like you said, I'm Esther Parish with the Environmental Sciences at Oak Ridge National Lab, and I'm happy to be here tonight. It's a beautiful night, and I've only been out here once before. It's really, really pretty here. So I hope you enjoyed the film. This was really interesting to me because I actually grew up in Chicago, and I went to the dunes once or twice. I remember hating to drive through Gary, Indiana. My father called it the armpit of the nation. But I didn't know any of this history, so I thought this was really interesting. Plus, it ties together a lot of the things that I work on at the lab. So we work on the sustainability of renewable energy resources for the Department of Energy. And we've developed an indicator approach to try to understand which resources would be more or less sustainable for future generations. So we have a set of indicators related to environmental, social, and economic criteria, and we worked with stakeholders to develop that kind of starting checklist, as we call them. And then when we are looking at a specific renewable energy project, we try to work with local stakeholders to really think about what their goals are for the project and which of those indicators can help them realize whether or not it's going to be a sustainable pathway. And so mostly we work on bioenergy development, but also I do some work with hydropower, and I think I'm only supposed to talk about 5 minutes and then open it up for questions. So that's pretty much it. I mean, examples of the indicators would be things like for soil quality, you know, we look at soil carbon or erosion rates, and for water we might look at nitrate runoff, for instance, or base flow in the streams, and then it's a lot harder to capture some of the social indicators, social well-being, for instance, but, you know, trying to understand if something will be profitable, because if it's not profitable, it's probably not going to move forward. Social acceptability is a really hard one to understand. So it was really heartening to see the people in this community working together, because that's what we would love to see, is all kinds of stakeholders, you know, from industry, NGOs, community coming together to really develop a workable path forward. So, should I open it up for questions?
Yeah, so the main emphasis of our meeting is the question and answer part of it. And so, yeah, if anybody has questions, it's time to start directing those. Actually, I have one to start with.
Okay.
Sustainability does cover a broad area.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the areas that are, I guess, some of the more relevant topics for today that are like the topics that people would be discussing within the field because it is so broad? What would be?
Well, of course, the hot topic now, especially with the administration change, is carbon. So figuring out how we get to net zero emissions by 2050, that's the new administration's goal, means that we really have to think carefully about how much energy or how much carbon an energy resource will produce, how much it might consume, and so that's a hot one. Water quality is always a big issue, especially as communities undergo water stress, which will be exacerbated by a changing climate. So those are probably the biggest. Well, and now environmental justice. That's the administration's new priority too, is to make sure that I think 40% of the benefits of any project funded by the government have to go to historically disadvantaged communities. So trying to define what that means and how we equitably distribute the benefits of the project without adversely impacting communities is something we're all scrambling to figure out how to do right now.
What's that called again? You said justice?
Environmental justice.
Environmental
So
justice.
there's energy justice, environmental justice. We're all trying to figure out
Right.
what these things mean.
Right.
So in the video, there was an area near Chicago that was being destroyed by industry. Do you have any idea if that area would fall under that category, for example?
Definitely. I mean, you know, you saw there was some work, well, I guess you probably didn't see the parts of the film where there was a lot of work to try to make the Indiana sand dunes not just a place for resource extraction, but to make that natural beauty available to all those steel workers and folks who, you know, didn't really have any other place to go for recreation and enjoyment. And so, yeah, those folks, you know, a lot of them were working paycheck to paycheck, so they would.
Okay, so because it's a blue collar area of factory type work and so on, that's how it would qualify. Is that spelled out? I mean, pretty clearly.
It's not spelled out clearly.
It's not spelled out clearly.
So that's why we're all. It's just new language that's suddenly going into all of the research agendas that we've just received in the last few weeks. So we're all trying to understand.
Is there anything that immediately disqualifies an area for that? Like, I don't know, like Tennessee's pretty financially low compared to other, you know, like New York State or something like that. Does that mean that like Tennessee would qualify and maybe New York would not, or how?
I think we're trying to focus more on communities. So, you know, I'm interested in learning how that could vary by, you know, within a city, you would be thinking in terms of neighborhoods, but in a place like Tennessee where you have cities and rural, how do you like equitably distribute the benefits of you know, an energy resource that is very distributed, like bioenergy, where you're growing, you know, across many counties.
Is there
Go ahead.
Having an idealistic plan is one thing, but being able to implement it successfully without cutting off your nose to spite your face is quite another. Could you speak to that? Because in my opinion, not all the things that want to be done are bad, but the implementation, I think, is going to be almost impossible, at least the way it's currently stated. What's your view on that?
The implementation of the new policies, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, it's definitely challenging. I mean, historically, I think projects have run into issues because not everyone was at the table, so to speak. We didn't have representatives from all the different stakeholder groups that needed to be there from the beginning, and so when you're trying to catch people up after you've already formulated a plan, it's pretty much too late to move forward effectively. So, and you know, historically the science community hasn't really been, you know, necessarily focused on interacting with the public and getting stakeholders involved. So it's very challenging to.
Well,
to figure out how to move
interaction's fine,
Yeah.
but what about the likelihood of being able to implement the proposed solutions? That's what I'm talking about. I mean, I'm all for openness, for talking with all the stakeholders, but what I don't see is a plan to overcome things like solar and wind power can't possibly, in the near future anyway, offset the destruction of the oil industry. And it's not that I'm pro-oil, I'm just saying, I'm a scientist. I look at the facts and they don't add up.
All I can say is we're wrestling with all these questions. I was just in an international IEA, International Energy Agency Bioenergy workshop the last 2 days, and yeah, we're all struggling with those questions. How do you move forward? How do you figure out the right portfolio? Because everybody's kind of working in these silos. So if they think this is the best solution, but that solution counteracts something that's going on somewhere else, like we're just not going to be able to move forward fast enough. Much less get communities on board. So yeah, it's a really, really hard problem. And I wish I had all the answers. So, yes.
Do you think this is going to take away from the research and development by having two avenues that you're getting down? Or do you think?
What do you mean by the two avenues?
Well, you're kind of trying to satisfy different things. Will it take away from the momentum? You sound like, all of you all are struggling.
Well, we're trying to
We're
figure out
trying
what
to
the trade-offs and synergies are. So one of the things I had in my title, I think, was landscape design. So ideally, you work together to come up with solutions that can create multiple benefits. So you're not just sequestering carbon, but you're also growing something, a crop that can be used for multiple purposes, that can withstand climate change, that can provide habitat for species, clean up water. There are some solutions that seem to be able to create multiple benefits. So how do we work together to find more of those and find more good examples that, we have a lot of examples in particular contexts, so how do you generalize those across the country or across the world?
Human behavior is difficult.
Exactly, because every place is so different and every community has different needs, so, but we've got, we don't have much time, because we're already supposed to, like I said, we only had these new things handed down a few weeks ago, and we're looking at meeting intermediate targets for carbon reduction by 2030, and then being net zero by 2050, so we're gonna have to get it together quickly. But,
Do you have any specific information on the switchgrass? They were trying to grow it and use it for biofuel.
yeah, I worked with that project a lot, actually. So switchgrass was very promising. I understand you had people here to speak about it when it was first getting going, like back in 2010, I guess. So there was a great project that was an effort between the state of Tennessee and University of Tennessee researchers and Institute of Agriculture. And so in Von Orr, Tennessee, they knew, you couldn't get a biorefinery being built, or cellulosic biorefinery being built without a feedstock supply, and you couldn't get the feedstock going without knowing that there would be demand from a biorefinery. So the governor helped jumpstart this program where they had a biorefinery being built at the same time farmers were being contracted to grow switchgrass within a 50-mile area, and knowing that it would take 3 years for the switchgrass to reach full yield. And so that all worked out. It was a demonstration scale biorefinery. The ag extension agents were really positive about their interactions with the farmers and went out and taught them how to plant it and harvest it, and everybody was pretty excited about it because switchgrass has long roots, that can sequester carbon and clean the water, and it's a native species, so you don't have to add fertilizers and stuff, and it creates more habitat. So everybody was excited about it, but unfortunately, rather than build a full-scale biorefinery as a follow-on here in Tennessee, DuPont ended up building it in Iowa instead. And so those farmers, some of them are still growing switchgrass, but now they're using it, some are using it for cattle feed, others are using it now to create earthables, which are new, like the paper plates and things that you can use for takeout containers and stuff like that that are better than plastic. So yeah, that was very disappointing to me personally that it didn't work out here in Tennessee because it seems so promising.
That does bring up an interesting question, because, we talk about, take plastics. They're the most ubiquitous substance around, right? And we're all drinking them right now, right? Okay. And what are people doing really to try to switch to something different? I know I've seen plates now where they're made out of bamboo. You can get utensils that are made out of bamboo, which is again a renewable resource. So what can we do, and how can we help people switch from plastic to something else?
I was going to ask you a question about that, because I don't know if any of you all have seen, there's sort of a myth right now about recycling plastic, and whether you like them or not, John Oliver did a little segment on plastic recycling and went to this island in Malaysia where they're taking in all this plastic from around the world that was supposedly recyclable, and it's really not, and they're piling it in, burning it. And I think a lot of people are under the myth that the plastic is all being recycled, so you can drink it without any guilt or anything like that, and it's really not.
It's all out in the ocean.
Right, well,
Yeah,
there's
well, no, it's all out in the fish
the
and the whales and
people
everything else,
that push
unfortunately.
putting the recycling on the bottles and things for the oil industry because they have to find a way to make plastics acceptable. But you know, maybe ones and twos get recycled sometimes, but
Yeah, but see, that would be my thing, what are we doing to change?
and
What are we
even
doing?
in Romania, when I've been there, you was staying by the river, you'd see plastic bottles and plastic everything going down the river. So I think, I was wondering, how does your office look at recycling and things like that? Do they look at that as well? Because I think the switchgrass, the plates, is awesome. Because and the other question for you, is Iowa native to switchgrass, or are they just introducing another large corporate farm product here for a product
They were
that's
using,
not
they're
native?
using corn stover there for the
Okay,
biorefinery instead of switchgrass,
Okay,
corn cobs and residues.
okay.
But, so in terms of what we're doing, in terms of the researchers that I interact with, there is a big push, you know, to figure out if you're going a plant for bioenergy or biofuel, how do you also create all of those co-products, we call them, that go along with the petroleum industry, like plastic. And so how do you make something, that's a whole field of research, materials research and stuff going on at the lab where they're trying to come up with more biodegradable, circular economy, they're calling it, where you know, make something that really is more sustainable.
Yeah.
But the economics, it's hard to overcome or, you know, to get prices as low for the fuel and the co-products, especially when the petroleum industry is pretty heavily subsidized.
Yeah.
So,
Right, if you pay the full cost for the plastic, you would probably want to use something else, but,
right.
you know, like in Gary, Indiana there, if you weren't paying for disposal of the waste, it was just going in Lake Michigan. So,
Are you familiar with what they've done out at, was it Wampler's, Bill?
Yeah,
Oh, with the
Wampler's
solar
factory
panels?
there.
Yeah, what, not only the solar panels, but what they've done with, were they using switchgrass as a fuel or
It's
some
kind
cellulose?
of an anaerobic burning of
Oh, the
various
protoser,
wood chips and other
proton
kinds
pump.
of waste products, organic waste.
And
they're
then they
making
came out with what was
methane
the,
out of it.
and the end product too that they use for, fertilizer?
Yeah, graphene.
Hydrogen gas.
Okay.
Yeah, I visited, it's been 5 years since I've been there at least. At that time, it wasn't operating at a plus. They were still working on trying to fix it. I would think that if they ever get it so that it actually does what they say it'll do, they'll be able to sell a lot of them. But
Now,
Yeah,
we were
because-
there just a
yeah.
couple of years ago,
Yeah.
and it was, I think, at least breaking even for them at that
Yeah.
point. If not, you know, they were wanting to expand it.
well, they would if somebody gave them the money.
I think they got a grant.
Yeah.
That's how they did
But
it.
that's
They don't get
not
investors,
true
they get grants.
expansion,
Yeah. Well, I
because
think
grants go away.
Well, no, that's true.
Yeah.
But I think their concept, that's the whole idea, I think that weren't they trying to basically come up with a concept that, you know, would not only be workable for them, but possibly for some other company where they're trying to generate their, you know, electricity and fuel and everything else, you know?
Yeah.
They're saying they're gonna be totally off the grid in another couple of years.
But
Yeah.
they've been saying that for 10 years.
Oh, okay.
Well, one of the things,
Yeah,
we're currently writing a work plan to try to look at how we could use waste, municipal solid waste, construction debris to generate fuel or biopower. And the tricky thing is just not very well tracked. You know, the overall quantities, because I was talking to a guy who works for the transportation, Department of Transportation, trying to quantify how much of this municipal solid waste gets trucked across the country from place to place and even over borders. And a lot of places will just record the total amount and not you know, how much is plastic or how much is steel or whatever, so that makes it harder to try to tap that as a resource.
There's something too that I don't think we're looking at, and that is everything that we use is for convenience.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you give up your dryer, or you don't use your oven, or you don't drive your car,
Or
you're
drink.
giving up that convenience. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's one thing, because I don't think recycling's happening. I think it's just going to the landfill.
Yeah.
So when we start to look at things, there was this beautiful sand in Australia they put down for all the kids. And it was made out of glass that they ground and turned into pebbles. And they put down thick. So the kids could run, they'd run barefoot. It was beautiful. But until we start looking at our waste in terms of a recyclable product, it's just gonna keep going to the landfill.
Yeah. Or being
So
burned.
we need, but we also personally, I think, we need to have personal responsibility. Because everything that we use is for convenience.
You're right, yeah.
So-
Our society in particular.
But that's what they were saying in the film too. They said if these changes are gonna happen, it has to happen
With
from
us.
That's
But-
right,
but,
because
you know,
that's
and
the only
that's
way
what-
it'll work.
But we're sitting here with some smart brains, sitting in this little room, right? But there are not many of us.
Yeah.
Not many of us with brains, or not many of us sitting here.
True that.
Yeah, there we go.
What do you think about artificial or man-made wetlands, and are there any on the Oak Ridge Reservation?
I don't really know if there are any on the Oak Ridge Reservation, actually.
I know they have a lot of wetlands that have been reclaimed, but
I think,
where they put plastic pipes under the ground and then use it to filter the waste.
right, I think, you know, the best thing is a natural wetland, but if you can't have a natural wetland, then I think recreation of some wetland is better than not having one, in terms of environmental benefits. But I know there has been a system of, you know, go in and build something, pave over the wetland, and then put it somewhere else, and that can be abused, I'm sure, but.
No, I mean, honestly, it's an interesting topic. I mean, it's just because there's so much going on, you know, you hear so much about like the bleaching of the barrier reef and stuff like that with the corals dying off. But there are some people doing research where they've actually found some of the corals that were able to go ahead and survive in the temperatures in the ocean. And so they're trying, I guess, to maybe reseed these in certain places. And then I know I just ended up watching some little thing with David Attenborough, and they were talking about planting trees. That was one of the best things that we could do, all right, is to go out and plant a tree somewhere, because, you know, that's gonna help, you know, with all sorts of different things, as far as like, I guess, carbon and.
Well, that's an interesting issue with the trees. So one of the projects we work on has to do with the Southeast U.S. pellet exports to Europe. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that industry. It's been growing over the past 10 years or so. So, you know, there's so many controversies about that.
So we're shipping wood from here.
Yeah, so the idea is it's a new revenue source for forest owners in the Southeast who live along the coast, where they can sell their wood residues and thinnings and things to these new pellet mills that have been set up by Europe. Because Europe, one of the ways they're trying to meet their climate goals is by switching to renewables, like using wood pellets in place of coal. And so it's created this whole market where, you know, they've already had barges that were on their way to Europe for other products, so they're filling them with these pellets and sending them over there to burn, and they're getting, you know, they feel like they're doing carbon or mitigation that way. But then we've got folks in the Southeast who are arguing that we're cutting down valuable habitat, or, you know, that it's better to leave the tree standing long term. So it's this really controversial thing going on that we've been studying.
Yeah, but they're cutting down old growth in Tasmania for toilet paper in Japan.
And see, we're not cutting down old growth here, but that's the perception by a lot of people.
We're not planting much either.
We don't have any left.
Right.
Yeah,
But we do have,
need to plant some more old growth.
You're funny.
well, and some of the benefits could be, without that extra market, there's not as much
come after
incentive
my
for these
trees either. I'm
for
with
these
you.
forest owners to thin the forest and keep them healthy. And without thinning, we could get more wildfire. And it's just this whole really interesting thing going on. Yeah.
You were announced as a sustainability expert, so I'm going to ask you a sustainability. Given these pelletized trimmings that are being used from forests, given that man is a greedy creature, not just men, women, I got to include the women.
Not necessarily.
Humans have shown that they are greedy. If the trimmings bring in a little bit, what about cutting more and more and more so that the income is greater and greater and greater? I mean, look at our pharmaceutical industry. It works on that model. Is that really sustainable?
Well, the Europeans care a lot about that, and so they've been writing a lot of sustainability certification requirements. So they will only contract with, suppliers in the U.S. that guarantee that they can meet these requirements of not cutting down too many trees and, leaving some dead trees for birds and that kind of thing.
Can you talk about the same issue but in South America? Because the rainforests are going fast.
Yeah, that's a pretty sad situation.
We can already see the effect of the decrease in rainforest in our weather, our rain patterns, the whole thing.
Yeah, that's a very sad situation. It is being cut down with no regard to.
Is there any way to stop them from doing it?
Yeah, but how do you get
We're
them to
burned.
stop that kind of thing? Because again, it all goes back to what you were saying. If it's not profitable, nobody's gonna do it.
Well, one of the points in this video was that, those industries who started up on the sand dunes and turned it all into a hellhole, they didn't clean it up on their own volition. They had to have legislation like the Clean Water Act that forced them to do it.
Which came about when people spoke up and because
Yeah.
remember, or I don't know if you saw that part, but they were saying we didn't even see the pollution. We just saw money,
So,
money for
we have
them.
this situation where the profits of industrialization are privatized, but the costs of cleaning up the pollution are socialized until people start complaining about it, like you say. And the only answer I can see to this is more legislation. And so how do we educate our legislators, many of whom seem to be sadly misinformed, to face up to this problem?
It's not information. It's in their pocket, and they know what they're
All of the
doing.
money,
They know what they're doing.
they don't care.
But they're getting rich off of it as well.
Well, and it's really hard when you have a country that
You
operates
don't
like
see
ours,
the
where the
shit
administration can
after they're
completely change directions
Yeah.
every 4 years.
Well, the
You lose
Citizens
your momentum.
United
That has
Act
nothing to-
created this huge situation where all the politicians are for sale. And that's one of the reasons why what you're talking about has happened.
Yeah, I
So-
mean, the pharmaceutical industry is probably the best example. There's a revolving door between the Food and Drug Administration administrators and the pharmaceutical company administrators. Now, one's supposed to be governing the other, but if you've got a revolving door of administrators between them.
Watching the chicken house, yeah.
Yeah, well, my name happens to be Fox.
Okay.
What was that?
Show me
But
the
it is, I
chicken
mean, but you're
houses.
absolutely right.
You're
I mean,
cracking
that is
me
the
up.
truth.
Well,
That is the truth.
I mean, I
I'll show
think
you
it
the
also comes
chicken
down to
house.
education.
Well,
you
you
know,
are,
like they
you're
brought up in the
scientists, I
film.
would assume that.
When
I'll
people
show
are
you.
educated, they're more likely to speak up for themselves. And we
You
heard
come
about
to my
a good
chicken
project. I mentioned I was in an international workshop the last couple of days, and they were talking about some positive examples of changes related to bioenergy. Like there was a lady from Sri Lanka who said her company is working with female farmers in particular to try to get them to grow this miracle plant, they call it, and I can't remember the name of it, but it's like really easy to plant. You just cut off a branch, stick it in the ground, it grows into a tree. It can be used for different medicines and stuff. It can help with biodiversity. It can clean up the water table. So she said she was trying to, over the past decade or so, they've been working with these local communities trying to get people to grow more of this plant, you know, on the borders of their fields and things. And they kept waiting for someone to pay them to do that, and finally they realized that the way they could inspire these people to want to do it is by explaining how it cleans the water for them on their own property so that they aren't poisoning themselves from their wells anymore. And then once they bought into that, then they started to see the other benefits and were, you know, ready to grow it, and they could get a big enough people growing it that they could start to have a market for it for other products and things. So you just have to find that thing that'll get people to, that will really resonate with people to inspire them to move forward, which can vary by every context. So yes.
As a consumer, when I go to the grocery store, I'll flip packages around to see ingredients and nutrition information. And part of that is basically to see, you know, what is the manufacturer putting into a product. Are they putting good, wholesome ingredients, or are they putting junk in there? You can tell, you know, if it's got a lot of sugar in the product. I mean, look at some cereals. It's, you know, high degree of sugar. Well, I'm trying to avoid getting diabetes, so that's very important to me. So, but you can tell that, you know, companies, they'll position themselves as, oh, we promote good health, but then their products are chock full of things that would be probably unhealthy for most people.
High fructose corn
High
syrup.
fructose corn syrup. There we go. So there's some people that don't care about though, and they're just going to buy whatever's cheap or whatever tastes good or whatever. So I kind of apply that principle when I'm thinking about this subject to get politicians on board with, you know, trying to do something sustainable. It's just they're going to follow whatever direction the winds are blowing or the lobbyists are leading them. If you try to get businesses on board, they're just following profits. So I think, you know, for something that's effective, you have to get people in the grassroots, and to get people in the grassroots who care about that, just like food. Some of them just care how it tastes or how much it costs, but then there's a segment that cares what's in it and is it healthy for me and for my family. I think that something that would be a really good idea to help people start getting an idea would be if there was some metric to essentially grade, you know, the company, not just on the ingredients of their product, but what are they doing, their methods and methodologies, you know, maybe some type of a scale where, you know, they get neutral, good or bad on, you know, using recyclables, or neutral, good and bad on their degree of pollution or carbon footprint, whatever what metric, you know, makes sense. So,
You could probably do that by box or by whatever. What was the carbon footprint of this product?
I'm sorry, are you saying that
You
something
could-
like that already exists?
I'm just saying it could be that simple, just
Yeah.
like you're saying, lots
So,
of nutrition facts.
somewhere back in the 70s, they passed, you know, there was enough effort to pass some laws that companies had to put, you know, this nutrition information on packages. Before that, it didn't exist. Somebody, you know, that was legislated. But I'm just wondering if you're aware of anyone who's in the sustainability field that's working on creating something like that that could be applied to You know, maybe it's something that would have to be stamped on products that companies put out. You know, here's the grade as assigned by some federal department or ORNL or whoever, that basically, you know, they determine on an annual basis how good they are on 10 different scales, and that has to be stamped on their products for that year. To me, that would be, you know, there's gonna be some people that don't care, but for companies, there's gonna be a calculus that says, you know, hey, we need to do better on cleaning up so that we don't have to put, you know, our dirty laundry on every one of these products. It seems like that would be a good direction to go to get people, make people aware of it, and making choices about things that otherwise you would have no way of knowing if, you know, the company that produces this computer versus another one, are they polluting the environment, or, you know, are they making efforts? You'd have no way of knowing that if there wasn't such a metric.
Well, now there's something called the Center for Science in the Public Interest. They're actually one of the people who got the food labelings and calories and everything else on the packages. And they produce something called the Nutrition Action Newsletter. And, you know, that's probably, I know they're certainly interested in, you know, things like, you know, is this product sustainable? I mean, you know, those kinds of things. But, you know, I think there are people out there who are actually trying to do something similar to what you're asking.
I've seen a lot of efforts toward getting a label, you know, this is
Yeah.
certified sustainable, but not, I haven't seen anything like you're talking about with the relative ratings.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that would, I'm guessing that would cause a lot of legal liability at this point.
Well, but I mean, basically, there's some metrics that, you know, in terms of ingredients on food, you know what's in there. I mean, they could lie about it, but they'll get in trouble for that if that was discovered. So if there was some metrics by which, you know, as a company as a whole, you calculate how much, you know, output of, you know, you've done with, you know, if you're a factory, how much pollution's coming out your stacks, and, you know, have a metric for that, and that's measured by a third party, and, you know, it gets part of the grade or something. Not just a thumbs up or down, but something with some meaningful metrics on it.
Yeah.
Not too many, but enough that, you know, it puts the choices back in the hands of consumers. If they just want to buy what's cheap, they don't care if the pollution to the environment's getting polluted. They're not being forced to buy a good product. But for those that care, the information's there, and I would hope that education efforts to get people more aware of it and more conscious of sustainability, then they have a tool to make those decisions by. That seems like that's missing.
I know industry is driving some changes, like I heard a few months, maybe a year ago now, about like Anheuser-Busch is one of several companies that has is saying they only want to work with farmers that meet certain sustainability requirements for their supply, and so there are, you know, startup companies that are helping farmers to record everything they do that's a sustainable practice and get credit, you know, so that the companies can say, oh, well, that farmer's doing the right thing, so I'll contract with them. I've heard of some efforts going on like that.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about. Companies that are trying to do the right thing would be more in favor of getting a metric in place,
Right.
because that's going to make them, you know, have an advantage over their competitors.
Right.
Well, that'd
That's
be a great
some-
marketing tool, without a doubt.
Yeah, if you, yeah.
Yeah.
So basically, that's, if something like that could get rolling, and again, I don't know if a department like yours would be, you know, could be a force in that, or if there's other agencies that would be more appropriate to. But basically, if that ball could get rolling and that mindset could get rolling, and we could get something on the box. You know, they've added more nutrition columns or rows, but they started with something. If they were able to start with something that wasn't just a thumbs up or thumbs down, because nobody would be a thumbs down.
Well, maybe what you ought to do is have a label that says what the net weight of all the non-recyclable components in this product, whatever it is, are gonna be if they don't get recycled.
Well, there is a label that it's similar in a very small way, and that's the energy usage that they put on all appliances now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
That's a good example.
it's a good example in a very small niche. And if they did something like that, you know, could broaden it. And that actually works to the consumer, because the consumer can say, well, I can save money by doing this. So it's not just helping the environment, they're also helping themselves.
And that's true, because 20 years ago I bought a a central unit and got a pretty efficient one, and it paid for itself 4 times over. It's a good idea. So that's a really good example. If there was something like that that didn't just apply to a product, but applied to a company as a whole, and then that way you have a way to.
But the only way you're gonna do that is with legislation.
Yes, but once the legislation is there, it's really hard to get it undone once
Yeah,
the things are
that's
getting
right.
stamped on all the products. And,
This is my point, you need to
I know, last
educate the
4 years,
legislators.
yeah,
It's
well,
not just a question of money, you gotta educate them and make them realize what this is leading to if
Yeah.
we don't do something about it.
this is
Because
actually.
we may be toast right now as far as we know.
Yeah, well, that is actually something I thought about for years, and you said the magic words, which was company, basically talking about a company that's trying to do good, only working with certain farmers and so on. They would be motivated to back such type of legislation. I hadn't thought about that.
Well, and even the petroleum industries are funding a lot of renewable energy research and thinking about, or climate change research on the side, because they know.
I know it's
You
coming.
guys see this
Don't put all your
in
eggs
the
in one basket.
G7 meeting, I don't know if any of you all saw that, but the artist
That's
there
great.
made all the G7 leaders
All
out
out
of
of trash.
garbage, you
Oh,
know.
that was
and
great.
Easter Island.
Boris Johnson was made out of old cell phones.
Oh, Mount Rushmore.
And
Where is this?
it was in England where they had the G7 meeting,
Oh, they
and
put
he
it up.
made Joe Biden out of computer chips. But they're all things that can't be recycled, just trying to make a
Point,
statement.
yeah, very good point too.
Yeah, and they said that people were just standing around in droves looking at it, so I think it did make a point good.
We've got about 10 more minutes before we kind of need to be wrapping up. Is there any areas that we haven't covered or touched on in some way that you would hope we would have discussed?
Like, let me ask you, what could we do? Okay, like, what could somebody like, other than maybe plant a tree?
Yeah, you were talking about landscaping for bioenergy, what can we do about this?
You know?
Well, I was thinking locally, I mean, doesn't TVA give us the option to try to buy a certain percentage of green power if it's available, which helps spur some of those markets.
I don't know if they're still doing that, and you never really know whether you got it or not, that's the thing.
They make sure they got it. Last I heard, they had run out of it.
Yeah, that was it, I think, that's what I was worried about.
Yeah.
I think they are planning to put some more solar farms up, so they'll probably have some more for sale.
What's,
But the solar doesn't work when the sun's not shining. You need batteries, and
Right.
all these have an environmental cost.
oh,
It's not just free.
Well, you need storage. I mean,
You need
TVA does have
storage.
Raccoon Mountain.
Well, we have a Prius, and we just had to rechange our battery out.
Oh, God.
oh,
So, there's only one place in California that makes them, and they have to get recycled and redone. So there's a cost to go across, and there's a cost to put it in. So yes, we get better gas mileage, but there's a cost to that.
Yeah.
So we have to
Financial cost.
understand that there's a cost to everything we have. That we can't just have things for free. So, just
Everything
saying.
in that battery is valuable for recycling.
Yeah, well, at least it's not having our air conditioner stolen by somebody or a catalytic converter stolen by somebody. 'Cause there's valuable materials everywhere. And they're getting rarer and rarer. So
But
the
the-
more we can reuse them, then that's a valuable thing for a company as well, I
The
think.
battery in an electric car is a few hundred pounds of valuable recyclable stuff that can be recovered very easily. A gasoline car puts out between 5 and 10 tons of pollution of various kinds per year, which is completely non-recoverable.
A
And that's one of the
bicycle
big
doesn't do
advantages.
anything. A bicycle, you just ride.
All the way to California.
If they would just put in, if they would just put in the darn paths, so you wouldn't be taking your life in your hands.
Did you have a question or Mike?
Until.
Well, if we had
legislation
sidewalks
and
here,
public
we don't have
impacted
sidewalks.
personally by exactly what you're
We live
talking
for years
about.
without a
We're gonna
car,
be
but
sitting
we
here
can't
talking
hear.
in 2050.
Yeah. No, and that's just
We've
it,
got
like
to
they
get
said.
behind you.
Fireworks, too.
We've got to get people behind your committee or whatever and make it personal. And watch who we vote, hold the legislators' feet to the fire. I mean, till they burn.
Yeah.
It'll add to the
Because
carbon
we can-
footprint, we don't want to do
Yeah,
that.
we can-
I think that would be worthwhile, Carl.
How successful do you think it would be in Tennessee doing that? How
That's a good
successful do
one.
you think it'd be in Tennessee holding their feet to the fire?
It has to impact them before they will pay attention.
But there are champions, you know, like the mayor of Knoxville, Mayor O'Hara.
Oh, yeah.
She read a report that we had written with researchers from across the state about what climate change impacts might be, and so she called us up, and you know, we worked together to find a project where we could help them figure out where to put green infrastructure, and then she became like a national climate champion, and you know, so it really seems to
South
come down to
Knoxville. South
South
Knoxville.
yeah.
But we can't ride a bike down here.
Oh.
We'll get run over.
You'll get run over almost anywhere, believe me.
You can walk 26 miles though.
Oh.
Wait.
In Ijams,
I had kind of a technical
Baker
question
Creek.
I was wondering about.
Ijams.
You know, a lot of people are talking about burning things, various wood chips or waste, bio waste of some kind. If you don't burn it, your only other alternative is just to let it decay. And what is the carbon footprint of the decay process versus the burning process?
There are a lot of people working on
it's
that,
identical, it just
and
takes
I'm no
longer.
expert in that, but
I'm not quite sure, because you can make a lot of methane and do other things. I just
Well,
want.
that's
there's a
what
whole-
we need
there's
is
a
whole
more
group
of people
methane.
it's called life
What's
cycle
known so
assessments.
far about it? That's what I'm
Um,
wondering about.
well, that's part of why the wood pellet industry is so controversial, because if you're you know, that it varies by tree type, it varies by how old the
know,
tree
that's a
is,
good question.
you know, there's so
Maybe
many
they fart methane like
parameters
cows do.
that it gets really complicated, and
No,
the
it's
answers aren't very
underground.
clear. But
Well, it's
that's definitely
swamp
something that,
gas, it's
you know, the
ground
spacing, how
supply.
often you clear cut, all of that stuff makes a
I
difference,
used to have
so.
an earthworm farm.
So you're saying
I do too.
I
have
should
two
maybe
of
just
them.
leave the wood in my yard out there to decay versus burning it up, or does it matter?
No, I mean, so some has to be left for wildlife reasons usually, or, you know, for soil protection, but we're trying to figure out what the balance would be. Like, can you get enough wood that, because often it's piled up and burned, not just left to decay. So yeah, trying to understand what the supply could be if you left enough for environmental purposes, but you know, and how do you consolidate all of that to make something marketable to an industry so it would move in. It's all really
You use
complicated.
wood and stuff like that for mulch around your plants, you have to use less water, so that's a benefit. I mean, the mulch will eventually, you know,
Right?
carbon
In
dioxide.
East Tennessee, it goes that fast.
Yeah, and it depends on where you are.
I use leaves, I've started using leaves,
Yes.
and they last as long as the wood chips, and they work a whole lot better.
Those are good
The city
too.
does.
We just let our trees just do its thing.
But
They
you,
just leave 'em.
you asked about what you could do for for landscaping. Like I'm sure you've heard, if you plant native grasses and you have more habitat for species, you don't have to mow and use all that gas.
And flowers,
But then you have to deal with people criticizing you for not
pollinators.
mowing your yard, right? So it's like, so education.
We've got a brush pile in the back of our yard. It's not that big, it's about an acre. But we
Not
have
the
a,
brush pile.
not the brush pile.
Rather than the brush
The
pile.
whole property's about an acre, and we have a brush pile, which is the home of a family of rabbits, cottontail rabbits. And it's, in fact, our yard has been designated by the National Wildlife Association as a wildlife habitat. We filled out some forms, 3 pages of forms about, do we supply water, do we do this for the animals, that for the animals. We've got about 40 bird species. We've got a possum, occasional, and we live in a neighborhood.
I'll bet your neighbors love you.
And, well, to tell you the truth, we've gotten several of the other neighbors in the neighborhood to do the same thing.
So what inspired you to fill out the paperwork? Like, is it just?
Because I'm a scientist and I care about the environment, and we've been supporting national wildlife for almost our entire married life, right? 35
I'm
years.
the animal lover, and he's bought into that too.
Nice.
She can talk to animals, I kid you not. But that's another story.
Well, the trick is to get them to listen.
To do what?
Get them to listen.
Catherine Reed back there is doing, her major is related and have a minor in sustainability working on.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, if you have been so quiet this whole time, is there a question you've been dying to ask? Maybe we could close up with a really good question from.
Oh Lord, that's a lot of pressure.
That's a lot of pressure. No
I don't
pressure.
know,
We're all
because
friends here.
A lot of the stuff that you guys have been talking about is stuff that we've talked about in some of my sustainability classes, and it's really interesting. But I personally do not have a huge background in some of that, so I guess my question is, I don't know, I mean, you work in bioenergy, how does that kind of fit into our energy grid now, and have you kind of thought about what like microgrids would look like in how sort of, because I really like the idea of microgrids, and I think that's kind of a practical way to transition our energy sources, but I'm not sure, obviously I'm not the expert on it, so I kind of want your opinion on what that energy transition might look like and how biofuel kind of fits in.
That is a good question. So can you define a microgrid? 'Cause
Sure. Based on just the way that I've learned it, it's a much smaller grid, basically community-based instead of large citywide grids, with collections of solar power and even hydro all feeding into the same energy grid. So it helps with things like you don't have to deal with power outages, and if you do, it doesn't impact the entire city. It'll be a smaller community impacted. So it really also improves energy efficiency because you're only using what that small community demands, based on what the environment can provide for it, and then those microgrids are often connected to a larger grid, so the larger grid can provide whatever the renewables don't, I guess, but that's just the way that I've learned it.
Yeah, that sounds like something I would think the Department of Energy will definitely be looking into after the recent cyber attacks in particular. I guess I have a hard time seeing how bioenergy could fit effectively into that, since that's at least agricultural based bioenergy, but still forest residues and things like that could potentially feed into that.
Well, you could have a bioenergy plant that was the backup power for when it's cloudy or when, because they talked about on NPR the other day that in Texas, or anywhere you have renewables, you still need some gas plants or whatever, but they've got to be idle until needed. But you've got to pay for them, and maybe you do it with something that's a sustainable instead of.
Yeah, well, and that's seasonal, but hydropower is being looked at a lot now because it's more constant, unless streams dry up. But
Unless you live in California.
yeah, depending on where you live.
And if there's a drought,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, all I can say is we're definitely trying to look at what is the right mix, the portfolio, so to speak.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
We've just about totally drained out most of our subterranean water, and that takes years and years and years to replenish. I don't see a plan in anywhere to replenish the groundwater, and that's pretty important. It's a great fallback resource, but we're not using it as a fallback, we're using it as a primary resource. And we're gonna pay dearly for that, we as a nation, I believe.
I agree. And then there's the instance when, like, in California, where they've drained a lot of the groundwater, and there's that salt water that comes in. So now they're pumping salt water onto their fields. So
Yeah.
we're just silly. We're silly people.
Or we build a pipeline over a big aquifer and pollute
Well,
it.
that's a problem on the Georgia coast too, and
Yeah.
Is
North
it?
South Carolina, Hilton Head, you know, they got the same problem there
Yeah.
with the aquifer being invaded.
Saltwater intrusion.
Oh, I didn't know that was happening in Georgia.
Florida too.
Yep.
And where?
All those barrier
Florida,
islands have the same
Florida.
problem.
Yeah, I would figure Florida. That
Because
would
they
be-
get their water from the groundwater on the mainland, and they've sucked so much of it out that all the salt water in the intercoastal waterway is just
Bermuda.
Who here
absorbing
has
in
water
there.
tanks?
Bermuda knows how to handle it.
Who here has water tanks?
As what?
Water tank,
Like a rain barrel?
How
Collecting
big?
and rain barrel.
how big are you talking?
I used to when I had hair.
If you're gonna water your lawn, though, that barrel holds 50 or 55 gallons. I lay that down every day on a hot day in the summer. It's
But-
nothing.
But in California,
you
they're
can
illegal,
get-
right?
Yeah, but you can get bigger tanks.
Colorado.
Colorado.
Colorado,
Well, they were
yeah.
illegal here, actually.
Because you can
Yeah.
daisy chain them all too.
Well, yeah, people do. I think it's mostly.
Well, if you got a small little plot you're trying to get water, it's useful, but,
The
Any
weather
kind of
here,
garden of any
I've
size.
had to learn how to deal with the weather here.
That's for
You
real.
get too much water or not enough.
I think
Yeah.
I'm being cut off here, so thanks so much. It was
It's
good
time
talking
to
to
go.
you.
Let's give that a hand.
Thank you for being a good sport.
Oh, yeah, thanks, it was great.
And for braving that traffic all the way here.
Yeah, it was bad. Why do people want to go into the city at rush hour? I was surprised.
We had.